Saram, everyone. Welcome and happy Pride Month. We're so excited to have you all today with us for this workshop, LGBTQIA plus Allyship 201. I want to be an ally, but I don't know what to say.
So before we start the workshop, we'll start with a quote to set the tone for today. So does anyone want to read the quote?
I can read.
Nice.
Um, God has no feelings of difference, such as the good and the bad, the likable and the unwanted, the wicked and the virtuous. The sandalwood tree imparts its fragrance even to the axe that fells it. Likewise, God is ever prepared to love, foster, and protect equally everyone without any distinction. But narrow minded persons cannot easily grasp the divine's equal mindedness. Indeed, how can a fishmonger know the value of diamonds? Everyone apprehends God's powers and attributes according to his own limited conceptions and experiences. Sri Satya Sai Speaks, Volume 22.
Thank you, Manasa, for reading that. So, before we get started, just to set the stage, this meeting is going to be recorded. I think the recording's already started and is going to be posted on YouTube. But you can always DM Sayanjali on Zoom if you like your name not to be shown in the recording. And then put your questions in the chat as we walk through the content, or you can save them for the Q&A at the end. I think we have like 20 minutes slated for that. And then, of course, please respect everyone by staying muted. And also keep your videos on if you're comfortable, but you don't have to. We're gonna have some audience interaction as well, like last year, so please participate if you feel comfortable. This is a judgment-free zone, so don't be afraid to answer our prompts or ask questions, and we'll also try our best to monitor any discussions in the chat.
Yeah, so we'll just go over what our agenda will be for today. So first, we're going to go into a bit of a discussion about why this is important within the Psi community. And then we'll discuss what terms we should all know, what an ally is, how we can all be an ally and put that into practice, and then some takeaways, and then we'll have the Q&A, as Mother said.
So I'm sure most of you know who we are, or at least who one of us is. But just to reintroduce ourselves, I'm Madhu. My pronouns are she, they. I am from Nova, Northern Virginia, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And I am a YA. Well, I'm 24, if that helps.
Hi, I'm Sayanjali. My pronouns are she, her, and I am currently living in the Bay Area.
And you're also a
I'm
YA.
also a YA.
Anjali, would you like to start?
Yup, sorry. Okay. Um, so we're gonna start by kind of talking about what the experiences of a queer person who goes to Sci Center might be. So queer people definitely are facing some challenges in our centers that the way that they're currently set up. And we'll go through a few anecdotes about what the experiences of a queer person might be. And these examples are all fictional, but they are realistic, both from our own experiences and also experiences we've heard from other people. That's kind of like what we based these on when we wrote them.
Okay. So imagine you're a kid growing up to Sci Center. You love SSE class and you're friends with all the other kids in SSE. You've been going to Sci Center your whole life and look up to all the adults. In SSE class, you sit with all the girls and the boys sit on the other side of the room. You sit with your mom in budgeons while your dad sits on the other side of the hall, and you accept this as the norm within the community.
You are 11 years old when you start having confusing feelings for your friend. You think of her as your best friend, a relationship that's stronger than any of your other friendships. At this age, aunties start telling you that you need to wear a shawl. You start asking questions as to why, and your SSC teacher told you that it's to limit distractions. Oh, sorry. Okay, you sometimes are confused why you can't sit with your friends who are boys. You start asking questions as to why, and your SSC teacher told you it's to limit distractions when you're in a spiritual place. You start hearing some comments about how it's not natural for women to marry other women.
You're now 15 years old, and you're starting to recognize that these feelings you have are stronger than being best friends. You realize that you have a crush on your friend, but you don't know what to make of that. You're confused as to why you don't have similar feelings for any of the boys in your class. You don't know a single adult who is married to someone of the same gender who goes to Sci Center, and you wonder why there are no out queer people. You're not sure how your parents and the community in general will react when they find out. You question whether being queer is normal and wonder if you can both be LGBTQIA plus and spiritual.
Now you're 22 years old. At college, you have started dating a girl. You told your parents about your girlfriend and being gay, and the relationship between you and your parents has become strained, and conversations with them tend to be about fixing your queerness. You question whether you should break up with your girlfriend and make everyone's life easier. You're confused about how your identity and spirituality can coexist.
You are 30 years old. People are asking you when you will get married. You're concerned about finding a life partner and if you could ever bring them with you to Sci Center. You're also concerned about people's opposition to same sex marriage and worried about the future of LGBTQ rights in the current political climate. You're an SSC teacher, and parents are worried about you being a bad role model for their kids. You start bringing up challenges that LGBTQ people face, like gender separation, awareness of queer identities, and the lack of involved out queer people, to the committee, and are met with sympathy, but nothing changes.
You are 45 years old. You have decided to keep your personal life separate from Sci Center. You still sometimes attend bhajans, but are no longer very involved, as you are so tired of feeling like you cannot be your whole self. You are still spiritual, but no longer feel like Sci Center is helping you become a better person.
So, how would you feel? I want everyone to focus on this person's feelings and not how we can fix their problems. And you guys can take a minute to think about it, but whenever you're ready, I'd like to hear some answers.
I can start off. I think I would feel very hurt, mostly because I would feel hurt because this is supposed to be a community that I can be my true self in, and it's supposed to be a space that is comfortable and welcoming, and it would feel hurtful that that I no longer feel that way.
Anyone else would like to answer?
I think I would feel like neglected, like just like my feelings go unacknowledged for so long, feeling as though like I've been abandoned by, I mean, this person grew up within the side fold, like people that were in their lives like forever, to kind of neglect their identity or their feelings and kind of abandon them in vulnerability.
We have some answers in the chat as well. Um, Alone, isolated, angry, hurt, left out, unsafe. Um, I think if no one else has something to share, I think our interpretation when we were writing this, obviously it came from some personal experiences and community experiences, but we've, I would imagine that one would feel lonely, confused, some stress, a lack of belonging and not being understood for something that's out of your control. Honestly, you want to set up the
Yeah,
next?
we can continue. So now we have gone through how a gay person, which is someone who's attracted to the same gender, might feel at different life stages within Psi Center. But these experiences would be different for someone who's trans, which means someone whose gender does not identify with their birth sex. So um, now we'll go into the story about how a trans person might feel within Psi Center. So you see from a young age and that there's somewhat rigid gender roles, and men and women sit separately. This doesn't make sense to you because you don't feel like a girl, even though everyone tells you that you are. You sit on the women's side with your mom, and your dad sits on the other side, and you notice the way that these gender roles are rigid.
You're 10 years old and you know you're not a girl. You feel uncomfortable sitting with girls in SSE class and sitting on the women's side during budgeons. You're constantly hearing subtle comments that you don't act like a girl. You feel uncomfortable with the SSE dress code, which is different for boys and girls.
You're 18 years old, and you've come out as a trans man to your parents and family. Your parents don't understand as they've never met a trans person. You have started dressing the way you want to and are talking to doctors about transitioning medically. However, you don't feel comfortable going to center, as you don't know if you can sit on the men's side. You distance yourself from the community you grew up loving.
Again, so how would you feel?
I think also with this question, we kind of want to ask more about like the gender part of things. So if there's anything relating to that that you'd like to share.
Prashant says, I would feel betrayed, misunderstood, isolated, not belonging anywhere, lonely, painful, lost, confused, without community, questioning if one belongs in the community they felt a part of prior.
I can jump in here. I'd probably feel a lot of cognitive dissonance as well, where I feel like internally I feel one way, but then externally I'm being told something else. So on the gender side, I think that's something I might feel.
In some ways, it goes even deeper than that because when I was 11 and 12, my mom and other people would always say, like, I don't act like a girl because, like, the standards are just so particular. I don't know how else to say that, where women have to act or girls have to act a certain way. So I feel like it's even worse in some ways. I don't know.
Yogini says, questioning the gender rules at center.
I just wanted to add to that. I think sometimes, especially as a young person, I feel like when you see something, like one particular rule or standard or something that maybe you feel doesn't apply to you or doesn't make sense to you, it sometimes makes you question the whole thing and if any of it is even valid or applies to you at all. So I think that's definitely something that could come up.
Yeah, these are all really good points. I think in one way or another, we can all probably relate to a portion of how this person might feel. Our interpretation again is, everything that everyone has said, loneliness, confusion, lack of belonging, lack of understanding about something that is not your choice. So we're not going to necessarily discuss this, but I want everyone to think about what if this person, this hypothetical person, doesn't identify with either binary gender? Imagine how difficult it would be for that non-binary person. I hope we all also noticed that in these two situations, these people ended up distancing themselves from Science Center at the end of the stories that we told. Um, and did we know that 7% of Americans identify as LGBTQ? And think about how many people you know from Sci Center that are out or openly LGBTQ. Do you know anyone that has a partner of the same gender or anyone who has transitioned and is still in Sci Center? Probably not, or probably very few within our community, nowhere near that 7% statistic. And we don't see that reflected in centers because likely it's so hard to be out within Psy communities due to all the challenges that queer people face. And it's easier to just walk away.
So, as expected, there are mental health impacts because of this isolation that we discussed, that queer people are facing generally and also like specifically within our communities. So we're now going to read some statistics. So these are statistics from the Trevor Project, and they did a survey of in like American LGBTQ young people. So I think it's like 13 to 24. So this is the results, some of the results from the survey. So 39% of LGBTQ plus young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including 46% of transgender and non-binary young people. LGBTQ plus youth of color reported higher rates than their white peers. Nearly half, 49%, of LGBTQ young people ages 13 to 17 experienced bullying in the past year, and those who did reported significantly higher rates attempting suicide in the past year than those who did not experience bullying. LGBTQ plus young people who reported living in very accepting communities attempted suicide at less than half the rate of those who reported living in very unaccepting communities. So all of these statistics are pretty jarring. But what this goes to show is that since we know there's nothing about being queer that inherently relates to having higher risks of mental health issues, the social isolation part due to bullying and living in unaccepting communities takes its toll. And because of this, it's really important for us to make sure that within the communities we are a part of, we are ensuring that we're creating affirming environments for queer people. That's why it's so important for us to ensure that we're not contributing to these unaccepting environments. So specifically within the Psi community, it's important because we know that all of these factors, as we discussed in the beginning, we know that these factors are causing people to feel alone, isolated, like they can't be themselves. And we, as a community, have a responsibility to ensure that we're not contributing to this. And instead, we're creating these affirming environments where people can feel free to be and exist as themselves and also thrive without this need to hide anything about themselves. So something, again, that's important is that we all educate ourselves. So now we'll go over some important things that we should all know to create environments that are affirming to LGBTQ people.
So some of you might remember this if you were here last year or you've been keeping up with us online. We'll just move into a little bit of the direct educational content. But for some of you, it might be a refresher.
So first, we'll go over the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. So sexual orientation is how you describe your attraction to other people. For example, this is like gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. And then gender identity is how you describe who you are and your gender. So man, woman, non-binary, genderqueer. So these two things are independent of each other and are not the same concept. So someone can both be a trans person and also be gay, and those are not the same.
Some more or some definitions of the different types of sexual orientations. Gay being attracted to the same gender, a lesbian, a woman attracted to other women, bisexual being attracted to more than one gender, asexual, not experiencing sexual attraction, straight being attracted to the other gender. These are just some examples. Things to note, gay, bi, and ace are all adjectives, so can't use them with an article like a gay. You can't, that doesn't make sense. There are obviously other identities that exist, and we should be respectful and only use a label that someone uses for themselves. So, like, if you know a girl is dating a girl, you wouldn't automatically assign her the label of lesbian because you don't know how she identifies. She could be bi, she could be pan, she could be just queer, you know. So only use a label that someone uses for themselves.
So now we'll talk about some gender identity terms. So transgender, often shortened to trans, means having a gender identity that does not align with your sex assigned at birth. And then cisgender, also often shortened to cis, means having a gender that identity that it aligns with your sex assigned at birth. So a trans woman then is a woman who was assigned male at birth, and then a trans man is a man who was assigned female at birth. And then to define non-binary, that means having a gender identity which falls outside of or goes beyond the gender binary.
Another important word you might have heard before, or we've said it a bunch already, is queer. Queer is an adjective describing having a marginalized gender identity and or sexual orientation, so that is not cisgender and or heterosexual. It can be used as an umbrella term, a label for a person, or to refer to the entire LGBTQ plus community. Queer is also a historically derogatory word, so, we should be smart when we are using it in conversation. If you're not queer yourself, I'd say don't use the word unless a queer person starts the conversation with it first, because you don't know how that word will be received.
So next we'll talk about pronouns. So this is often something that comes up when talking about LGBTQ people, and I feel like this is often something that people don't really understand. So a pronoun is honestly like it's just a word that's used to replace a noun. And in this case, we're talking about a person. So a lot of times we use pronouns to refer to someone to avoid repetition. So for example, this is a sentence, and we've put the different pronouns here for like different pronouns in A, B, C, D, and E. So would anyone like to read this sentence with the they, them pronouns?
Okay, I'll do it. Okay. Shri went to Bhajans on Sunday and left their tabla in the hall. I asked them if it was theirs and if they could pick it up by themselves.
Thank you. That was great. So it's actually very simple using pronouns, like using the pronouns that people want to use, people want you to use. And often when someone, we can all share our pronouns. And, if someone asks you to use certain pronouns for them, it's important that we all try to do that. So it's easy. Obviously, people make mistakes, but as we can see here, with a little bit of thought, we can all make sure that we're using the right pronouns for people.
And also to note, some people prefer, obviously, this list is not exhaustive. Some people prefer pronouns that are not here, not on this list, or a combination of pronouns on this list. Like personally, I use two types of pronouns, she and they, so they're likely interchangeable. And some people use no pronouns at all. If you're unsure about how to use someone's pronouns correctly, you start with Google and then ask that person if you're still unsure. So now that we have some definitions for the various parts of the queer community, what about an ally? So an ally, if you look it up, is someone who advocates and supports a community other than their own. Allies are not part of the communities they help. So you might remember from last year, but we've come up with this diagram to explain what we kind of find the most valuable in an ally. And I think you can't be a true ally without exhibiting all three. They are supports others, educates themselves, and speaks up. And hopefully that's you. Otherwise, why would you be here?
So why should you be an ally? Often in the Psi community, especially, but also generally, the LGBTQ community is a community that we choose not to acknowledge. And a lot of times there's some resistance there, stemming from ignorance when LGBTQ people are included casually. For example, in a play or someone mentioning their husband, etc., leading to this resistance that exists. Being present as an ally helps counter this ignorance and resistance and normalizes the LGBTQ community, both so that LGBTQ people can feel safe and others understand how to treat others with respect and kindness. This doesn't mean that everyone is now going to start announcing their gender or orientation to everyone. It just means that people at some point, hopefully, will bring a spouse to center and feel comfortable doing that, or be able to sit on the side that aligns with their gender identity. So I think here what we're saying is like we have all of these like principles like love all, serve all, and all of that, but I don't think we're putting them into practice. So like this passive love that we have, the status quo is not enough. And I think we all can agree that no one should have to hide a part of themselves in their spiritual community or honestly ever. And it's really important that we make sure that no one feels like that.
So we know we should be allies, and we know being an ally requires those three things. And I think we can all agree on the first two, supporting others and educating themselves, for sure. Like that seems very obvious. Most of us even already do such things like coming to this workshop. But what is so important about the last one? And why are we giving it special attention? Does someone want to read this quote for me?
Can I read?
Of course.
Why should you speak up? Krishna looked upon those, even if they were good in themselves, did not oppose unrighteousness and injustice committed in their presence when they had the capacity to do so as actual participants in the crimes. When evil and injustice and violence are being perpetrated, if individuals look on unconcerned, they must be regarded as accomplices in the crimes. In the end, they also suffer as much as the criminals. By their passive association, they provide encouragement to the evildoers. Satyasai.
So I think Swami is a lot more emphatic about this point than we are. His choice of words is very telling. But there is already a simmering undercurrent of discrimination against the queer community. I mean, we went through those empathy scenarios at the top of the call in the Psi community. It's generations of conditioned prejudice coupled with increasing majority privilege. So to not say anything and not oppose this undercurrent is a problem. It's not enough to be silently accepting when, people are feeling discomfort. We have to actively show that we are allies.
So now we're going to go through some of the things that we can do, some tips to how to put these things into practice. And then after that, we'll go through some scenarios where we can discuss putting these like things we've talked about into practice.
How do we know when somebody's feeling uncomfortable, though? Like, it's not obvious.
I think that's a good question. I think it would depend on the scenario, obviously. I think if we are observant of little things that are continuously happening, like even if there's not a queer person in the area to feel discomfort, there are lots of things that are said or are perpetrated without any necessary victim. So it's not that there's a requirement, a prerequisite of someone feeling discomfort in order to put these things into practice. It's more like you as an ally have to be have to try and be aware of things before someone feels discomfort. But in a situation where, maybe it's not something that you're picking up, like maybe it's something that someone says and it just like you're not paying attention or, something, it happens, right? I do it all the time. I think being someone that is open about, supporting others, it's easier for someone who is feeling discomfort to reach out to you, and then you can be made aware of the situation. Obviously, you can't be perfect. There's no way that you can prevent or help someone 100% of the time. But I think if we put in the work before, it helps return on investment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. I think just another thing is that like obviously some people people have to also speak up for themselves, right? And like explain that they feel discomfort. But there are some ways like we can tell. Like if someone just like if someone doesn't come to center anymore, right? You would know that maybe something is up in their life. You don't know what it is, but there might be something up in their life. So I think that there's some ways that we can tell. And other ways, like I do think, especially with the queer community, with like what we're doing, I think we're pretty vocal about this. So I think it depends, but I do think that like there's part of it is like listening to people, and then the other part is like they also have to like you can't read anyone's mind either. So they're like both sides to that.
So thank you for that question, by the way. But we've established that speaking up is imperative and necessary to being an ally. Um, Saying something is showing support, basically. Otherwise, your support is pretty invisible or immaterial. Even if you feel it, if you're not showing it, then nobody else is kind of goes back to my point of like being someone that is visibly supportive. No one's gonna know unless you actually say something. But it can be difficult when you don't feel like you know the right thing to say. Like you feel it, but you don't have the words or you don't have the terminology to say what you want to say without causing a bigger problem. Um, we've we've already equipped you with some of the terms that you can use, like the different sexual orientations, gender identities, but you should make sure you're still applying them correctly. So in this little green box, like you might think to say like she used to be a man, but you should probably instead say she is a trans woman. The same way you might think to say homosexual, but you should instead say gay or lesbian or preferably whatever label that this person uses. But in everything aside, it's better you try with good intentions than to stay silent. So, in a situation where you're still unsure if you have the right terminology or if you're applying it in the right way, I I think it's better to say it wrong than to not say anything at all. That age-old saying, if you see something, say something.
Yeah. So now we're going to start like talk about a few more things we can say in terms of having inclusive language. So one of the things is that we should start using gender inclusive greetings. A lot of times we say Sayram, brothers and sisters, and we feel like that's including everyone. But this might not include someone who doesn't identify as a man or a woman. So there's a very easy fix to this. You can just say Sayram everyone, Sayram all. There are other ways that we can kind of um, talk about people and not just focus on this like binary men and women. We can say Sairam Sai siblings. There are all kinds of other ways we can say this that kind of include everyone. Additionally, we can be aware of different family structures when we ask about someone's partners or their kids. So, for example, if you meet someone, like maybe you're like helping out with like the newcomers, like with the newcomer, and you're like, well, is your husband here? Well, what if this person has a wife? So I think, and then you can be like, are your kids here? What if this person doesn't have kids or they're divorced? Like, there's so many other reasons why, like, we can't just make this assumption that everyone's married, everyone has kids, etc. So we can just be like, did you bring anyone with you instead? So there are different ways that we can kind of think about the ways that kind of like we are very set or like the way kind of like the status quo of people have been doing this forever and but it might not be the most inclusive way to be. So I think that we need to just start putting more thought into how we're addressing people, how we're asking questions about people. Additionally, something that we all can do is offer our pronouns. So a common way that people offer pronouns, like you can just say, Sairam, my pronouns are he, him. Or also a lot of people put it in their Zoom, like in your Zoom name. People put it, like you can put in your email. And this makes it comfortable for someone else to share their pronouns if they feel comfortable. Because by sharing your own pronouns, you're saying that we can't assume pronouns just by looking at someone and assuming what their pronouns are and how they'd like to be referred to. So by offering your own pronouns, if you're comfortable doing that, you're kind of showing that you understand this and that you will respect someone else's pronouns when they also, like if they share them with you. So now we're going to go through some scenarios, and if you have any questions about these scenarios, feel free to put them in the chat. But otherwise, like these scenarios are going to be like we're just going to be discussing, so feel free to also unmute yourself and give your thoughts.
So, like Anjali said, we're going to go through some scenarios. You can unmute or write your questions in the chat, and we will discuss them after this is being read. Can someone read this for us, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to. During a YA satsang, a member shares their journey of reconciling their queer identity with their love for Swami. The facilitator thanks them, but quickly shifts the conversation, saying, "Let's move on to a more universal topic. What would you do if you were a bystander in this satsang?"
Feel free to share. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think Swami has study circles for everyone, not just for the mainstream. And so I would say that we do need to talk about all topics that are raised in this study circle, not just a universal topic. Even if it's for one single individual, we need to talk about it.
Similar to what Uncle said, I feel like my reaction in reading this scenario was, what is more universal than experiencing Swami's love or God's love? And if that is different for different people, that's the beauty of Swami's love, that it manifests so differently in each of our lives. So that would be my reaction in saying that everybody's experience of Swami's love is universal. And so we shouldn't be kind of making this judgment that one way to experience that love is unacceptable while others are.
I would, on the other hand, pose the question back to the facilitator and say that, can you explain to me why this question by this Sai sibling of ours is not universal? Please tell me why this is not universal and why we need to move to some other topic that you deem as universal. So I'll put them on the spot and ask them to explain it. And then watch them squirm.
I think my mom is a lot braver than the rest of us.
I think this is also an opportunity. Sometimes I think putting people in a spot, I always worry sometimes, unless you really know that person, because sometimes it takes you in a different direction. But I think one of the things earlier, one of you were talking about is, we talk about a lot of things, but we don't actually do. This is a great example, I think. I mean, to me, or explain yourself that if you think about Swami's message, I think one of the young adults earlier said that his absolute essence message is love all, serve all. This is really where this situation really fits, right? The true message, are we really following? So I would kind of put that as, the key message of Swami and really say, hey, let's talk about this much more. Because to me, this is the absolute essence of Swami's message.
I mean, we have to do it in a way that is loving instead of putting people on the spot too, right? Because with love, when you change people, it just works so much better, right?
Agree. And I think a lot of people listen as well when you do it with love. What you're saying may not be agreeable, but they do listen. I think sometimes we have to be cautious in how you say it rather than what the message is. A lot of situations, people listen.
See, the person who has at that point come forward being so brave, so courageous, so willing at that point to be the cynosure or the center of attention by saying that, hey, this is my story. It's taken me a long time to reconcile my identity along with Swami's teachings and what I'm seeing in the centers. They have basically bared themselves open and they're not sure how they're going to be received. To not acknowledge that and to sideline it, saying that, yeah, that's all okay, but let's get on to something that's more important or that's more universal, is, I think, one of the most unloving things that somebody could have done. And for them to not recognize that I'm the facilitator, and here's a person who's come and standing in front of me so naked. And for me to just shut it down can be very, very isolating, very unloving. And at that point, I'm not even doing the role of a facilitator. Forget a facilitator. I'm not even doing the job of a human. So I don't think that, I'm very unloving when I say that, when I push back and say that, explain to me why this is not universal. Explain to me why we need to go to another topic. I'd like to know because I'm a member, I'm a part of this conversation, of this discussion. And I see this Sai sibling of mine being so brave and being so courageous and putting and wearing their heart on their sleeve. Why? I would like to know why we are side skipping this topic. Sidestepping. This is very, very important. So I'd like to remind them at that point that you're the facilitator, and so I don't see why what I'm saying is unloving when I point out to them that what they have done is unloving.
I think it's also important to acknowledge like skirting around the question, kind of. I think we try to kind of play it safe in a lot of these discussions because, we might not want to say something too ostensibly like controversial or something or kind of get ourselves in trouble. But I think when we do that, when we skirt around the question and we kind of don't say things overtly, it gives the facilitator or whoever you're asking the question to an opportunity to do this and also not directly answer the question. So you're both just left in this like area of confusion where nothing's kind of been rectified and nothing's been solved. So I do think there's like kind of that added importance of, being direct with your words and being intentional with like what you're saying and how you're saying it so that you can reach like sort of like a actual conclusion.
I think like another way to also get to people sometimes is to see how to relate to that person. So for example, in this case, right, the issue is a topic of universality, but like identity has many facets. So potentially one way to get to this person could be to talk to this person about like maybe what aspect of identity they relate to. So let's say they're like an immigrant, can like, talk to them about how like being an immigrant is an aspect of their identity that they consider to potentially be more universal. Then kind of explain to them that like queerness is just like another aspect of identity and kind of like showing them that what they view about universality isn't necessarily true, but in a way that they can also relate to so they can be more likely to kind of change their mind a little bit.
These are all really good points. Thank you for talking a lot. I think we relate or we agree with everything that's being said. Obviously, there's space. There are times when you'll want to be direct or when you'll want to be more soft. Um, when responding to a situation like this, I think all the points that everyone brought up are make sense. Personally, I am my mother's child, so I would obviously be more direct. But I think there is value in speaking with intentionality of be having it be received in a way that will be more productive as well, like Durga mentioned. So I would say that it depends on the situation. We didn't really provide too much context or detail here, so this conversation was exactly how I wanted it to go. Um, our general response to this question would be like a three-pronged approach. You have multiple avenues to communicate your feelings during the situation. I think everyone here, we mostly focused on responding in the moment, which is definitely a good option. Um, I would also take the effort after the satsang to go and speak to the facilitator one-on-one. Maybe you didn't, maybe in the middle of the satsang, didn't have a chance to pursue the conversation fully, but outside on a one-on-one situation, you could, talk to them more and understand what their opinions are, blah, blah, blah. And then the third thing I would do is talk to the person who shared in the satsang. Thank them for being brave and being courageous and bringing up something that was probably not easy. And then, saying that these kinds of conversations are necessary. I think sometimes you run the risk of sounding um, like you're congratulating someone on a negative experience in their life, which can be tricky. As a queer person, it does become difficult when someone who's not queer comes up to me and is like, "Wow, it's so great that like you're able to be gay." And I'm like, well, I didn't really have a choice. So you do run the risk of that conversation, but I think if you have already spoken up in front of everyone during the satsang, you're more likely to be received well when you speak to that person one on one. We only have one more scenario, but would someone like to read this?
I can read it. Okay. An SSC student confides in their teachers that they think they might be bisexual. One teacher, caught off guard, says, "Just focus on your devotion. These phases pass." What would you do if you were the second teacher in this scenario?
Again,
Again,
feel free to
go ahead.
unmute.
Go ahead, Saiteja.
Sairam, thank you. I think in that moment, I would pray to have a sense of awareness and to be in the present moment and to, ask the child uh, if they would be willing to, just speak up a bit, just share a bit more, right? And to put them at ease or just to let them speak further, because I'm sure we've all said things we regret. And I know I've done that in the past. And I know if someone ever said something like that to me, and it has happened, just parents say it, right? We say to each other, just something like, "Oh, this passes," with regards to anything at all. That's not only hurtful, but it's like you're shutting someone down, right? You're sort of extinguishing someone's fire, their flame, their light. And there's really nothing worse than that to do to another being. But I feel like it would just require a sense of awareness. I think that's what I would hope to have in that moment.
I would also like maybe the student, maybe like after the other teacher has gone or something, to talk about it and make them feel accepted and loved. And then also discuss with the other teacher if the other teacher is like just maybe doesn't have the knowledge about how to treat situations like this or how to handle situations like this. That's something that maybe as a second teacher you can share and like show them how to like as Saite just said have awareness and not extinguish their flame because like that I guess that's it's a little hurtful to be put down also when you're younger and you think that your teachers like know everything, so it's important like for to like have that validation from both the teachers. So it'd be really great if you're able to talk to this the first teacher and explain how to handle the situation and they can go back and talk to the student. If they're not willing to like listen or they're not ready to listen, then I think it's just more about you trying to build that relationship with the student that makes them feel loved.
I also think in this situation, there could be a lot of merit to telling the student when the other teacher is there, like directly in front of the teacher, like tell the student, like, you know, it's not a phase, like you're feeling like how you feel about yourself is valid, like things like that. Because I think having those separate conversations is also something that's good to have those one-on-one situations. But with with the student, if the student sees one teacher say it in front of the other teacher, this I think the student would also feel a little empowered that like the teacher is able to like, stick up for me here and like validate me. But I think both are important to do probably.
I think it also speaks to the importance of an SSE teacher or a YA advisor in a center, right, or a setting, that it is a tremendous responsibility, because I feel like we've had some battles with folks at centers I'm a part of, trying to get them to be more open, right? Just for really simple things as well. But I know sometimes it also speaks to our human experience and acculturation of being very closed off. And then I think for some folks, being at the center means it's a box, right? So it's a very small, closed box, and they have to be very rigid and they can't smile, they can't talk a certain way, right? Um, but I think it does speak to someone in a role of a teacher, an advisor, elder, of just having to be very, very present and aware.
I was actually on a different call before this for like introducing the curriculum that's coming out for SSC gurus. And in the presentation, Sumananti, our national coordinator for SSSC, was speaking about how Swami has talked about questions and the role of the question and the guru, and that twamasi. So the question that is posed from the child, or what the child is telling or sharing, comes from them, from the small self. But as the guru, your answer must come from the highest self, the highest truth. And in this scenario, it doesn't seem like that answer or that reaction was coming from a highest truth. It seemed to come from their self, their small self. Because in that moment, I think that a guru's role is to make sure that that child knows, no matter what, that they are loved by Swami, by God, and like by the highest truth, right? And that whoever you are is accepted because you are God's creation. Um, And so I think that in that moment, it is the role of the guru. And if we have SSC gurus on the call as well, we have to really think about when we're answering questions from children, are we making sure that we are coming from Swami's message and not from our own biases and conditionings of society?
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I just want to read some of the answers in the chat. So Falgonati says, this scenario highlights the importance of increasing awareness and education of SSE teachers so that we can prevent harm from our end. And then Sai says, I will make sure to have a conversation with the student to make sure that the student feels loved and accepted, as Swami always accepts you for who you are. And also, it's important to mention to the other teacher about being inclusive so that the student has confidence in who they are. And then Yogini says, I agree, it's important to say something respectfully in front of the other teacher. Just wanted to read those out. Does anyone else have any other thoughts?
See, I've been SSC teacher for a while. It is truly a difficult question to answer because in Sai centers, they really quell the image of the body and the mind. But these are genuine desires and thoughts and things that the person identifies with or is naturally born with, that is not treated as the higher self necessarily. So I don't think there are teachings around how to, for example, in this situation, if it was a straight person that came up and said, hey, I have great desires for, I'm in love with this person, I want to go date this person, I want to do whatever that kind of stuff, I'm very attracted to these girls or boys. Those are not at all entertained in this eye center. Those are not even addressed. So let alone bisexual or any other, none of those are addressed in the Psi Center. So the teachers are, first of all, not even trained to address the mainstream, if you will, let alone bisexual or any of the other things that you're raising. The standard response to a question like this would be, don't focus on the body and the mind, put a ceiling on desires, or don't identify with your body and the mind and focus on your Atma, right? Unfortunately, that's not the right answer for any identity. That's not the answer for any sexual orientation. These questions are just not entertained in the Psi Center. It's a big problem. Not just with LGBTQ queer community questions. Sarah.
Any other thoughts?
I think I just wanted to kind of echo what brother said. I think that's important. A lot of times, the answers he was talking about are the answers which are given, but it doesn't connect, or it doesn't actually, it's not the right answer at that moment for anyone listening, whether it's a kid or a young adult or an adult, whether we're talking about LGBTQ or any other situation. And I think trying to educate ourselves, how do we kind of move away from that and acknowledge at that moment and continue the conversation is so important. And I think we need to not only educate ourselves and really kind of emphasize to each other. And I think that's whether, being an ally or kind of raising that voice to continue the conversation, not just end it either way. Earlier I was talking about, doing it lovingly, but that doesn't mean you don't continue the conversation. You need to be persistent in continuing the conversation as well. And I think this is kind of this whole aspect of using Swami's quotes to kind of quell that conversation at that moment. It's really not helpful for anyone, actually. And I think we as a community need to really kind of uh, um, speak up in that context. I think it's such an important thing. Thank you for bringing that up.
My answer to that question would be forget about the second teacher. I would say we are all a manifestation of God. We have to, a body is a manifestation of God. Who we are is a manifestation of God. And so we should really enjoy and dwell in it and really acknowledge it and discuss it and celebrate it. And so I would really like to understand from you what are the feelings you're having, and then discuss with other people who may not be bisexual in the class. What if they're straight? What feelings they have, and how should they be healthily acknowledging and acting on those feelings? This is not at all prescribed in the text or any of the manual, but this is how I would do the class.
I also wonder, in part of this conversation as well, is like creating space to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. Like, I think the part about getting caught off guard and feeling like you have to like have a response, and acknowledging that we don't at times, and like practicing humility and not knowing, and practicing kind of acknowledging I'm not sure how to respond versus feeling like you have to have the perfect response, either from higher self or from Swami or from wherever you feel like you have to pull from. And I really like the idea that you shared, Uncle, about having like a group conversation. If you, especially if one doesn't know, how do you engage in community? But I think for me, I'm noticing in myself, like, what ways can I practice humility when I don't have an answer to something and I don't feel pulled to answer, but feel pulled to kind of sit in the curiosity with that person or with community versus feeling like a perfect resolution has to come.
So I want to say thank you to Siv Kumar Uncle from the bottom of my heart, because I remember having a conversation with someone I very much love and cherish at our regional retreat 12 years ago about dating, and they really didn't have an answer, right? And now I'm almost not a YA, and to this day, we don't have any conversations at all for the SSSD kids who are growing up, for YAs. And I'm almost not a YA, and to this day, we don't really ever talk about the reality of folks who grew up here, right? Uh, the reality of just how to manage relationships and how to go out in the world and just be, right, as a being. And I feel like it puts a lot of stress, and undue stress, really, on young people. And I know it's difficult for the culture we come from, or the cultures that we come from, and the subcultures that we come from, for parents and even for everyone, because they're really managing a lot, right? I get that. But I do want to say thank you, Uncle, because you gave a voice to something I've really struggled with for a lot of my life, which is just having a conversation with adults, because they don't, I think we as a culture where we live now, we don't really know what to say to people, right? We don't really know what to say to young people at all. And I still remember that conversation in 2013. And all I got from that person I love so much, I really do love them so much, all I got from them was a smile. And they gave me some love and kind words, but they really didn't know what to answer and what to say to me. And I feel like if we had this conversation today, it would go a lot better than that. But yeah, thank you so much.
I think it's important to have those conversations, but maybe start with the parents of these like SSC children, because a lot of the times I think we're afraid to talk about it because we don't know how their parents will react to things that the teachers may say. And it's a weird situation where you're learning something in center that your parents don't approve of. Um, so maybe it's like worth having conversations with the parents about this, about how to approach this and what they're okay with children learning in SSE class too. But I do think it's important to discuss it. It's just a matter of how that doesn't upset any parents because at the end of the day, they are the sole caretakers of their children.
Yeah, the Swami has taught the deepest of philosophies, Advaita, and in very simplistic terms of practices. But we are stuck in the practices. We never graduate to the true Advaita that we should be practicing. And so people have very difficult time shedding their practices, which are just a stepping stone to, or maybe not be appropriate in this day and age, to really be one with God and be God. And so I think constantly we have to challenge ourselves to graduate from these practices that are not appropriate for our day and age, and probably were not appropriate in the US at all, and be the God that we should be.
I had a thought that I wanted to share, and I apologize for coming in late, so I missed some of the earlier conversation too. I think what both of these scenarios bring up, and some of the conversations too, is the importance of us as center members, wherever we are, to have to really try to expand what our interactions are with people in like general society and all too, because it seems, so both of the things that people have said in the scenarios that just folks, these phases pass, or like let's move on to something more universal. I'm trying to imagine. I was like, how would these people like operate in like the rest of society? And maybe that is what they would say, to their coworkers or to, other parents that they meet at, of their parents, their friends' parents, or that kind of thing. But I think the more we interact with, the rest of society and not necessarily be in, unfortunately, there's a lot of times people are kind of like this in this, they go to work, there's that bubble, then there's their Sci Center bubble, and they don't really interact with other folks in society. And I think the more like siloed a life we lead, then we don't give ourselves the opportunity to kind of learn and expand from these situations that because I just can't imagine saying that to someone at work, or someone's kid came up to me and and talked to me like that. And but I think that's, I know we're focusing, the topic is how can we be more inclusive in the Sci Center and the organization. But I think part of that answer is becoming more inclusive in the rest of society. And then once we are like that and we learn those lessons, we just become and be better. And then that becomes something that's part of our nature in the organization too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, Everyone gave some very nice responses. Thank you all for sharing. So our response that we kind of came up with just was just to say thank you for sharing with me. It's normal to be queer. Bisexuality is not a phase. You can be both queer and have devotion. These things are not mutually exclusive. Um, Being queer can be a part of devotion. It's just another experience in your life. And then, so saying this in front of the teacher, and then also later talking to the other teacher and asking them kind of like, did you learn this from? Educating them about LGBTQ topics, things like that. So that's kind of a lot of things we've already talked about. But yeah.
that's kind of it for today. We're nearing the end of our session, and before we get into our conclusion, we do want to say thank you for all for participating. I really loved our conversations this time around, and I hope everyone continues to have such conversations moving forward. As we wrap up, does anyone who wants to share, like to recap some of the things that we covered in the past hour? I know we covered a couple of things. If everyone's talked out, that's fine. We can.
I'll just hop in and say something real quick. I think that, first of all, thank you so much, Madhu and Sai and Julie, for putting this together. It has been a wonderful experience, and I always enjoy coming to, anything Sai was belonging related. But I just wanted to say, I think like the biggest takeaway that I'm leaving this conversation with is being an ally doesn't just mean saying the words, I'm an ally and I support, my friend or whoever it may be. It really means taking that extra step and going the extra mile to show that and act on your words instead of just speaking those words. And I myself, for one, am going to practice being a better ally and doing that. And I know I have a long way to go and grow so much more, but very blessed to have, this community to help me grow. And yeah.
Thanks, Shreya. Anyone else like to share anything they're taking away from today?
I just want to say thank you for taking this journey to raise awareness, educating everyone, and being present as yourself. Thanks a lot. And I think all of us have learned a lot, and I think we should continue to learn. A couple of points that I was really struck me. It's a recap, but at the same time, not just say but do. Speaking up and doing it with love. Being observant, I think Sayanjali talked about that. I think a lot of times we just look, but we actually don't take time to being observant of others around us. And she also talked about including the language. A lot of times we tend to assume, but don't assume till you actually know that other person. Importantly, don't repeat the mistakes. I think that's a weakness most of us have actually. We make mistakes, but the important thing Swami always says is don't repeat it. It's not about that making that mistake at that moment, but not repeating it actually. Just at our own Psi Center, we were kind of taking small steps, really trying to raise awareness about Psi voices of belonging, about the LGBT community in any conversations that we are having. I think it's important for all of us to do that. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks everyone for sharing your takeaways. We have a few that we wrote down, Anjali.
Yeah, so fostering belonging helps mental health. This passive idea of loving all and serving all is inadequate. It's not enough to have these inclusive thoughts without vocalizing them and putting them into action. There are challenges that queer people are facing when participating in Psi Center, and some of the ways that we can kind of work on an individual level to make our communities more inclusive is to be aware of the assumptions we're making, use inclusive language, and treat others with respect and understanding.
Before we move on to the Q&A, we have a couple things.
So as we discussed in this workshop, LGBTQIA plus people are facing many challenges when interacting with the Psi organization. So we wrote a personal pledge. So that's like a personal pledge for what you're going to commit to, and a petition to the Psi organizations to both increase awareness and education amongst members in the Psi orgs, and also ask that the organizations take steps as well. So I put the link in the chat. If it resonates with you, please check it out and sign it.
We'll also leave this QR code up in case you want to sign on your phone or something. Okay, Um, as you guys are doing that, hopefully, um, we just want to say thank you to everyone. Today's workshop is courtesy of Sai Voices of Belonging. I'm sure that's how most of you even ended up knowing about today. This community is run by myself and Sai Anjali. It's an independent initiative that aims to celebrate the stories of finding and accepting our LGBTQIA plus identities and strengthening our spirituality and faith at the same time. We are on Instagram, Facebook. We have a WhatsApp group chat. We have a website, and we have one episode of our podcast out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube. You can see us talking, which is really embarrassing. These are all linked. We have a link tree. Anjali, I think that's in the chat,
Yeah, I
hopefully.
just put it.
Okay. You can find everything that I just named in there, along with the petition and along with some somewhat monthly Zoom meetings that we hold, less formal versions of today, where we don't really have, content, but we discuss questions every so often. And I know some of you are already joining us there. We post educational content, personal narratives by queer sci people, self-reflective material on all of our social media accounts. Currently, we are unaffiliated with the official Psi organization, so neither SSIO nor SSSGC, but we hope to bring change in centers moving forward along with the petition. So follow us on all these platforms to stay connected.